So to kick this off, firstly, a little bit of warning. We're going to be talking about propaganda in this, and as you know, some of the propaganda is pretty fucking depressing. So I'll give another warning when we get close to it. But we're here to talk about how Zionism mobilized after October 7th. And the first thing I want to do is define Zionism. We're going to breeze through a bunch of this shit, so don't worry, we're not going to be spending a whole lot of time on this. Ideology from the 19th century about colonizing Palestine. This is from the New York Times. Zionists will colonize Palestine. This definition comes from PalChat, which is one of the tools at Tech for Palestine. Zionism is a political ideology advocating for the establishment of a Jewish nation state in Palestine. It's fundamentally a colonial project that disregards the rights and existence of indigenous Palestinian populations, and it has been characterized as a form of racism. So, bad stuff, and obviously, as I think everyone here knows, quite distinct from the religion Judaism. So, summarized, pro-Israel, quite racist, sort of Jewish supremacy might be a good thing, might be a good way to think about it as compared to like white supremacy, and its purpose is to defend the occupation and the apartheid of Palestinians. So, what we're really here to talk about is hasbara. Hasbara is basically, this is the Wikipedia definition, Israel's efforts to communicate directly with the citizens of other nations to inform and influence their perceptions. And so you've probably heard this thing before, it's propaganda. And in fact, hasbara, Israel used to call what they did propaganda, but at some point propaganda took on a negative term, or a sort of a more cynical meaning, and so they came up with propaganda. Propaganda literally means explaining, hasbara literally means explaining, and people often use the term public diplomacy. So what we're going to be talking about is basically, after October 7th, how did the propaganda work? Hasbara, a positive sounding synonym for propaganda, but it is propaganda all the same. So this book here is the Israel Lobby. It's from 2008. I gave it a read recently. It actually reads to me as quite pro-Israeli propaganda. It uses phrases that I am not happy with at all. But it was one of the first books that really showed how the Israel Lobby works in America and how, in particular, propaganda works. One example of this, when referring to AIPAC, an AIPAC staffer said to a journalist, you see this napkin, in 24 hours we could have the signatures of 70 senators on this napkin. And AIPAC has been a core part of the propaganda since October 7th. One of the major things that it has done is brought on this TikTok ban. So the TikTok ban is the forced divestment of TikTok from its parent company ByteDance. It's supposed to happen October, which is now, but if they have made significant progress, then it can be extended until January. And there's this conversation at an event that Romney and Blinken were talking, and they made it clear, it was clear to all of us, of course, that they have the overwhelming support for us to shut TikTok down. This is what Romney said, because of the number of mentions of Palestinians. So as everyone knows, TikTok is the kids, and the kids are a lot more pro-Palestine than the adults, and the Israel Lobby realized that they had to do something about that. The AIPAC is also fundamental for shutting down voices for Palestine in Congress. In particular, they got Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush kicked out. They put 20 million into each of those races. They put 100 million into this election cycle in total. And the reason for that is they don't want any voices that are pro-Palestine. And that means voices that are against other kind of racism that typically align with Palestine, which tends to mean that they want to take any progressives or really any left-leaning people out of the race entirely. Now the ADL is another important part of the Israel Lobby, and it is in America. It is probably the other really significant one apart from AIPAC, and relating to TikTok in particular. This was people refer to this as a leaked audio, but it wasn't a leaked audio. It was a public forum that he gave it in. where this is Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL, where he said that they have a major generational problem. It's not a left-right gap, it's young and old. We have a TikTok problem, a Gen Z problem. And so the recognition that he had, and what he was trying to do was shift the pro-Israel industry to focus on youth, to focus on Gen Alpha, realizing they've already lost Gen Z, but they're trying to shut down the voices of Gen Z by trying to shut down TikTok. Now, those are some organizations that are part of the hasbara movement, but when you look at classic propaganda and how it was spread, especially after October 7th, one of the major things that we heard is the beheaded babies hoax. And I'm using this as an example. I'm going to get to what actually happened a little more. But here we have Biden, the President of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, saying that he saw something which did not exist. And they later clarified that he did not actually see it, and that he misspoke, and that his getting dementia or whatever. They weren't telling us that, but we were pretty sure that was happening at the time. But yeah, he said we have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children. And the purpose of this, the purpose of all this hasbara in this particular case, is to dehumanize, is to support the idea that these Palestinians, or these Hamas, by extension Palestinians, are subhuman and animals. And those words were more directly used by Israeli government officials and army. And I'm not going to talk about really what's happening in Israel that much, but as it's brought to America, it's brought to someone like Biden, saying things that he didn't see in order to support the war objective, might be one way of looking at it, of an ally, and the other way of looking at it, the genocide of a people. There's also a ton of propaganda movies that are coming out at the moment. A lot of these, the Screams Before Silence is probably the biggest known of them. That's Sheryl Sandberg has been on a significant propaganda tour about that one. There's other ones, Supernova, We Will Dance Again. Yeah, there's an initiative going on actually as we speak, where they're astroturfing reviews on IMDb and giving all these movies 10 out of 10s on IMDb, trying to get them to be really highly ranked. And this is one of the ways to think about this propaganda. Their purpose is not really to necessarily tell us something or to have an impact. It's more that they want to take these lies and they want to put them in the public understanding of what happened. And so they're recycling them via President Biden, via media, into things that do not have to be said, or that do not have to have evidence presented to them. And so in this case, it's like, well, IMDb says it's one of the best movies of all time. It's not Israel says, it's not this is a propaganda film, it's this is important because we rely on these institutions. And in particular, we're going to be talking about tech a little bit later, but IMDb is an Amazon property and it is against the terms of service of IMDb, but that is what happens. And then the final sort of classic kind of propaganda that Israel engages in. This is the Citizen Resolution Proclamation in Palo Alto that they passed. It was either late last year or earlier this year. And some of it is kind of innocuous, but very much presenting a one-sided view, a pro-Israel view of things. And again, it's not really that this particular proclamation or any sort of citizens resolution had particular impact, but it's about telling the narrative and bringing the narrative to every part of society. So whether it's in government, it's in little citizens resolution, it's in schools, it's on IMDb, and as we're going to see in a little bit, it's in tech. Some other examples that for those who work in tech companies, which I think is all of us, things like petitioning HR about comments in Slack. Getting people fired for speaking up about Palestine. You can think of these as hasbara as well, and I take an expanding or an expansive view of what hasbara really is. And the way that I would, or not so much the way I would define it, but the attributes of these hasbara initiatives. They are advocating for the Israeli perspective. They're weaponizing the term anti-Semite. That happens all the time. And is a major feature of it. They're, of course, suppressing or creating consequences for Palestinian voices, and they're denying the apartheid, the occupation, and the genocide. But the purpose of the hasbara is to dehumanize, to muddy, to spin, and to make people think that it's complicated. If you've ever talked to someone who's like, oh, you know, this Middle Eastern thing, it's been going on for hundreds of years, and you know, that's the kind of complication that they're trying to introduce to people's minds. And of course, the purpose is to allow Israel to do whatever it wants. Now, the way that I think about hasbara is that it's distributed and it's democratic and it's permissionless. And you might recognize these terms from tech or from organizing. That, you know, permissionless. You don't need anyone's permission to create a hasbara initiative. If you are someone who is on Team Israel, you're a Zionist, you're a zealot, you're someone who really believes in this sort of thing, then you know, you can just create a non-profit. You can create a tech tool. We'll get to some of those that have been created. But they are also loosely synchronized. So there was a public diplomacy directorate. So public diplomacy is hasbara. That was created in 2021. And the phrasing they use is to facilitate the synchronization of Israel's narratives, especially during wartime. So that is exactly what happens. The hasbara is loosely coordinated from the top, loosely coordinated across tightly knit communities, and really part of the war machine in one way or the other. So post-October 7th, purpose obviously was manufacturing consent for the invasion, manufacturing consent for genocide, dehumanizing Palestinians, and in particular suppressing voices that were pro-Palestine in media, in social media, and within tech. And we're going to talk about within tech a lot in the second half of this talk. Before we do, we're now going to go into the hasbara section, the October 7th, the October 7th lies and dehumanization. So this is some unpleasant stuff. I'm sure you've all seen it before, but I just wanted people to know this was coming. So post-October 7th, immediately after October 7th, there was quite a number of different efforts that went to produce lies, propaganda that were aimed at dehumanizing Palestinians. You might be familiar with beheaded babies is probably the most popular one now. But at the time, they also did babies in oven, breast cut off, babies on clotheslines, babies stabbed and thrown in trash, and slitting stomach of pregnant women. And those were all reported fairly uncritically in Western media. They were reported by, on CNN, in the New York Times. And the purpose of all these, again, is to get it into the popular media. And you'll see now that when zealots on Twitter are talking about these, all of these have been discredited, all of them have been proven false. Even in Israel, no one believes these are true. But on Twitter, they're constantly brought up, or on other social media, they're constantly brought up as, how could you deny the atrocities? And that is the purpose of the weapons. They have entered the zeitgeist, and that is what mattered. The people who created these were predominantly this group called Zaka, and predominantly this guy called Yossi Landau. And he was one of, so Zaka is this organization which disposes of bodies in a way that is in agreement with Jewish customs, and the purpose of their organization, in October 7th, was to come in and help that happen. But he was also the sort of first responder on the scene. He was the person who gave all the media interviews, and he fabricated all of the things that we saw on the last screen just out of nothing. In many cases, he took photos of it that he refuses to show to anyone, and if anyone has seen Sheryl Sandberg's propaganda movie Screams Before Silence, you'll see that he goes over and shows her the thing, but of course it's not shown to the audience. One of his lies was repeated by Secretary Blinken. So the lie specifically here was that a family of 4 was tortured in front of each other before they were killed, and then the Hamas people who did it then sat down and they had a meal. And this has been proven to be impossible because the people that he claimed with the ages that were said were not known to, or the list of everyone who was killed on October 7th is known. We know their age, we know their ID, their name, etc., and where they were killed. And so it is impossible that this happened. He said this in a address to the Senate when he was speaking specifically to Susan Collins, who asked him a question about it, and then he told this story. He cried. You can see the video on YouTube, and just completely made up. Just no truth to it at all.
Sorry, I have a question. But that story is from this guy, the Zaka.
That story was originally created by Yossi Landau from Zaka,
Yeah.
and then it was repeated by Blinken sometime later.
It's like just that, sorry, but it's so interesting that it was just this one random guy who works at like emergency rescue that was the mouthpiece, like and then everybody just took everything.
So I will say it wasn't just him. Some of those, there's a bunch of other soldiers on the scene, that sort of thing. But it was also one person would say something, someone else would repeat it, someone else would repeat it, and so it's spread in that way. So the purpose of this is dehumanization. All right, we dehumanize Hamas. And in the West, people don't really know what's going on. They're all terrorists. You can't really tell the difference. So you dehumanize Hamas, you dehumanize Palestinians, but you create the justification for the invasion, and you create the need. Hamas is so uniquely terrible. They are ISIS. That was one of the claims that they had. The propaganda claims that they pushed out, and so they are so terrible that of course it's worth killing 20 people to get the 20 civilians to get a Hamas terrorist. Of course we can destroy all of Gaza because we have to root out Hamas, and that is very much what they're trying to say. It is so uniquely terrible that anything we do is allowed. The one of the major, and we're going to be talking about this for a little while. One of the major claims that has been made is this mass rape hoax. So there's polling data from a GOP strategist called Frank Luntz, where they asked a lot of people which are the things that basically manufactures consent the easiest. And what they came up with is rape civilians and massacred civilians. And so this is the reason that you keep seeing these claims of mass rape. There were 5 particular times that they brought out these claims, and some of these are several months apart. At the start, there was the Zaka claims with Landau, and he said, and this is a quote from him. He said, when we go into a house, we're using our imaginations. The body is telling us the stories that happened. The walls, the stone shouted, I was raped. Which is to say, there was no evidence. Right? There has never been forensic evidence done on October 7th, and of course, I'm not saying that in a violent attack in which thousands of men with guns went into a place that no sexual violence happened. None of us can say that no sexual violence happened. It is likely that it did, but we do not have any first-hand evidence. There's no forensic evidence. There's a couple of witnesses, some of whom have been discredited. But really, the idea of this mass rape being used as a weapon of war is made from nothing. And just because it's made from nothing doesn't mean that these coordinated attacks on it or using it as evidence, bringing it into the zeitgeist, is something that still happens. So here's 2 separate stories from NBC and The Guardian. The NBC one was from December 6th, January 18th for The Guardian. Anna Schechter, who's at NBC, she's been writing a lot of pro-Israel stuff. This was not her first thing. The Guardian, that particular author hadn't done so much of it, but the Guardian had written a lot of pro-Israel propaganda at this point. But the same paragraph basically occurred in both of them. And the reason that you have the same paragraph in both of them is that they came directly from these hasbara initiatives that were passed down from the public diplomacy directorate, and literally new talking points come out every month. We'll see in a moment some of the other talking points that have come out in this sort of passed out to all of the propaganda outlets who use them at the same time. The next step in this mass rape claim was this New York Times article. And this New York Times article, I'm sure you've read about it. It was called Screams Without Words, and it was written by a Pulitzer Prize winner, Jeffrey Gettleman, along with a non-journalist, Anat Schwartz, who did most of the reporting, and her nephew, who was a food blogger or a food journalist, I think, was it? But most of the work, it appears, was done by Anat Schwartz. And this How it went down was revealed in this story by The Intercept, and they relied on reporting from Mondevice and some others, including October 7th Fact Check, which is from my organization. And the some of what is in that story is that they listened to a podcast that was made on Israel Channel 12 that had Anat Schwartz talking for over an hour about how she produced the story. And what she said when she produced the story is, first she went and she talked to tons of hospitals. She looked all around Israel to try to find evidence and said, no complaints of sexual assault was received. No one met a victim of sexual assault. Then she said she went down to the kibbutzes and there was no evidence, no one heard or saw anything. And then she found one person who claimed to see it, and then she was like, oh, it can't be one person because it's two girls, sisters. I'm not quite sure what she's talking about there. Something about it is systematic, something about it feels to me that it's not random. And that is basically how this, how this entire thing was produced. It was produced out of absolutely nothing. Zero evidence of it all. And then the next thing that they did was they brought the UN into it. So this is United Nations Special Representative on Sexual Violence, Pramila Patten. And what she did is she went to Israel and she talked to some of the same evidence. She didn't do investigation. She talked to some of the same witnesses, and she basically came out and said, yeah, there's something could have happened here, but did no investigation. And in fact, she called for a fully fledged investigative process, including granting access to the International Commission of Inquiry, which is the UN body that does these kind of investigations, and that Israel is blocking access to. And the reason Israel is blocking access to it is because they already have what they need out of this, and any sort of contradiction of it would damage the war effort. And so what they got out of this, I really think she shouldn't have done this. This was she has an advocacy role, but I don't think it does anyone any favors, especially women, to claim mass rape happened when it didn't, and especially shutting down, using that as a weapon to damage Palestinian women and to cause that genocide. And then the fifth time this happened is the film Screams Before Silence, which was Sheryl Sandberg is on a propaganda tour, has been for a while. She's speaking at just a ton, just all over the place with this thing. I actually had to watch this propaganda movie to give this talk, and it's good propaganda. It really makes you kind of like understand their perspective and how they think about it, and they really took the absolute zero evidence that they had and they turned it into something. They had two witnesses who claimed one of them claimed to hear some things, one of them claimed to see it, and then they had two hostages who were held in Gaza who claimed to have been assaulted, and that was the entirety of the evidence. And so, obviously what happened in Gaza is not what happened on October 7th, and the sort of idea of this is not supported at all by the movie, but it was very powerful. It makes you really think that is what happened. Okay, we're past that bit now.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So Sheryl Sandberg is actually coming to UC Berkeley to do a screening. One of the students invited her.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you have a suggestion for a question that could help people in the audience understand that the film is propaganda?
I will have to think about that.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get back to that at the end.
Thanks.
All right. So second piece of propaganda here that came out in this sort of coordinated fashion. I'm sure everyone saw this. Is when the ICJ demanded Israel to allow aid into Gaza, when the ICJ came back with their ruling, which I think we were all waiting for, this very, very important ruling. And so we're expecting to see it on the front page of the New York Times. And what we saw on the front page of the New York Times was this very well coordinated, pushed on every platform possible, pushed by the State Department, pushed by the President. Details emerge on UN workers accused of aiding Hamas raid. And once again, this was a thing which had basically no evidence. It fell apart. But it led to I think hundreds of millions of dollars of being removed from UNRWA. UNRWA, of course, being the agency which is responsible for schools and hospitals in Palestine, It was expected that it would lead to widespread famine, funding mostly returned or was mostly supplemented by other sources, and famine was caused another way, don't worry, Israel still got there. But you know, this manufacturing consent was, you can see how it came from all these different sources at once to shut down the conversation that was pro-Palestine, which is that the ICJ says you have to stop this genocide. So you know, we can see kind of all of this, right? How that hasbara serves the manufacturing consent for the invasion, for the genocide, that it dehumanizes Palestinians. And we've talked about how they suppress, you know, sort of critical voices in media, but I'm going to talk now about how it happens in social media and within tech. So tech is quite a bad place. This is a statement by Matt Hocko, who's a venture capitalist at Data Collective, who has invested in my companies twice. First time for 25K, the second time for 250K. Person I've met a number of times. And he's just saying out loud, it's not collective punishment when the whole society is in on the atrocities. And this person has no consequences at all have happened to him for saying this. It's just a normal thing to say in VC land. In fact, venture capital, so venture capital are the people who invest in startups. They took quite an active role in manufacturing consent within tech, and in many cases reaching outside it. So one of the first things they did is they put together this VC statement of support. So they got 865 signatories. That mightn't sound like a lot, but there's only about 4,000 venture capital firms, and each of these firms signed the document. And they managed to put this together in a very short amount of time. In some cases, hundreds of signatures per hour were being added to this document. And I talked to some of the people who were involved in signing for their particular firm and how it happened. And what happens here is venture capital firms are partnerships. You have to get agreement from the whole firm to sign something like this. So it's not one person went off and did it, or if it is, that is a very, very rare case. And so people would have meetings, and there would be a champion, there would be someone who's saying, like, we have to sign this. And the reason that they felt they had to sign is because a lot of their deals are in Israel. There's an awful lot of money to be made in Israel. They invest a lot in Israel. But also, a lot of venture capital, a lot of tech is quite Zionist. And so they felt that if they didn't do that, then they would be shunned out of important deals. And then the other side of it, which I gather was made in quite a number of situations, was we don't know what Israel is going to do. We could tarnish our reputation forever by associating ourselves with Israel, which I think for these 865 firms, I think that they have. They used another phrase that Israel loves to see. We acknowledge Israel's right to defend itself, which obviously is one of the major terms or one of the major phrases that's used to advocate for invasion and for genocide. Another step in the pro-Israel propaganda was the Israel Tech Mission. So this was a group of about 50 people who self-funded their own trip to Israel. It was organized by the Meetup CEO, Meetup.com CEO David Siegel. You can't boycott him because he's since quit and he's now putting these trips on full time. So venture capitalists represented were Bain Capital, Co2. Both of these are really huge. A lot of smaller angels investors, a lot of a couple of startup founders, that sort of thing. It was covered in the Intercept, and the Intercept got the program, and the program showed that they met Benny Gantz, they met President Herzog, they met senior members of the IDF, they met parents of hostages, that sort of thing. And part of what they were doing by putting this on was saying, look, tech is still supporting Israel, making that a public statement both in the US and within Israel. The suppression of voices was a really, really important part of how all of this happened, and one of the loudest pieces of suppression was that of Paddy Cosgrave. Paddy Cosgrave is the CEO of Web Summit, which is really quite a big conference, very important in tech. Been doing it for like 15 years at this point, very well liked, conferences on like 4 or 5 continents. And he said war crimes are war crimes even when committed by allies. And he got cancelled for that. It took, I think, about a week before he actually had to step down of his own company. He's back now, don't worry, he's back. Because we'll see in a minute, it didn't really stick that well. And the reason it didn't stick is because it came out the method by which this happened. And these are slides by the guy in it, Adam Fisher. Adam Fisher is a venture capitalist at Bessemer, which is a pretty large fund. It's actually like a charitable trust in the US, and it has a venture capital arm, and then the venture capital arm has an Israeli venture capital arm, which is where Adam Fisher works. And he came and attacked Paddy Cosgrave, but he wasn't the first. And what it turns out that this was actually coordinated in a WhatsApp group of senior venture capitalists and tech leaders. This WhatsApp group had previously been involved in the cancellation or in the firing of an Irish customer service worker named Courtney Carey, who said Sir Shadon Palestine, which is Irish for Free Palestine, and also involved in significant attacks on Paul Graham, who is sort of like the granddaddy of the current startups, probably the most significant important person in creating the modern tech startup. And so this was revealed in this article, Inside the Pro-Israel Information War. The article is a must-read for anyone who's seeking to understand how this sort of thing happens. But basically what happened is they had a group of 300 senior tech leaders who coordinated who would go first, who would go next, and so on. The first person to go was Josh Koppelman from First Round Ventures, who I would say is a very well-respected member of the venture capital community. And what this led to was people from companies like Stripe and Intel dropping out of his conference, saying that they weren't going to speak at his conference. He faced basic ruin overnight by these attacks, and that was what led him to step down, and then he returned once this information was revealed. Powerful WhatsApp groups. This wasn't the first one, and I suspect there's many, many more. But here's a couple more that have come to light. One is Business Titans, and I can't remember exactly which Business Titans, but I think it was Bill Ackman urged New York City Mayor Eric Adams to use police on Columbia protesters.
Also the CEO of Kind.
And also the CEO of Kind. Okay. There's WhatsApp groups with very, very powerful people, and they're directing government agents on how to act in certain cases. And obviously in many cases it's related to campaign financing. Eric Adams, now probably on his way to jail, took a lot of bribes. A similar thing, this isn't just the United States. In Australia, they're having some scandal, and I don't know who any of these people are or what's happening in it, but I remember that Australia had a scandal that involved a WhatsApp group called Lawyers for Israel, and it called someone to be cancelled, and then the Australians did not like that at all, and then it all came out. The suppression of voices was not actually, 2023 is not the first time that this happened. Paul Graham was actually under attack in 2014 for having basically recently discovered Palestine, as I understand it, in 2014. He made a couple of tweets about kids being killed in Gaza, and all of a sudden got attacked by, I think, dozens or possibly hundreds of his colleagues in tech, often Israeli. And there's an article about it in the Intelligence, so you see I have references on almost all these things. And it's really, really interesting, saying the quiet part out loud. Due to the mandatory army service, the tech industry and the army in Israel are intertwined. They can't be separated. It might not be particularly smart to be critical of a sensitive situation you have limited understanding of. To translate, the army runs all the startups, which is true. And if you want to make money, then you better fall in line. Now, as it happens, Paul Graham is a well-known curmudgeon, and so people coming at him caused him to be like, fuck this shit, and he just went all out, and that's why he's been so vocal, and probably the most well-known person in tech who's been vocal about in a pro-Palestine direction since October 7th. There was, however, some other good things happening. Sam Altman gave this statement in January. I would say that as the narrative shifted from sort of October to February, in tech specifically, Sam Altman's statement was actually a really important step in it, and we probably all have feelings about Sam Altman. But a lot of Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians in tech that I talked to really felt quite maybe not happy, but they felt that this was a very good thing to have happened. There was quite a lot of what Sam Altman saw. I saw it as well, and it was actually covered in this article by The Information. The Information is actually founded by a Zionist and is run by, the editor is, we don't know that she's a Zionist, but she's the husband of the founder who is a Zionist. And put together this article about how Arabs and Muslims in tech felt really that they couldn't speak up. And the reason that they couldn't speak up, we'll get to a little bit later when we hear about big tech companies. But for the little tech companies, for the founders and that sort of thing, we see how VCs act when they're slighted. We see what happens, and this is why startups aren't, or founders of startups aren't speaking out, and it's also why workers at those startups can't speak out themselves, because the founders know that they can't let anything serious happen like this, or else they will not get any funding. And the important thing about tech is, or about startups, is you're only as good as your next round of funding. If you can't get your next round of funding, your startup is dead. The thing you've been working on for 10 years, your multi-generational wealth that you imagined for your kids, and often the wealth for the workers as well, because they're often quite heavily invested in those startups as well, could all go awry if they cross these venture capitalists who could just kill access to their company. So the venture capital complicity in this is really important, because venture capitalists have a huge platform. Many venture capitalists have hundreds of thousands of followers. The number one tech podcast is by, the All In podcast is by a number of venture capitalists. And they use that platform, access to power, and also they control the capital that goes into startups. They decide what startups get made. They decide which founders get investments. And so if you speak up, you're going to be a founder who doesn't get investments, and so your voice isn't going to be any use anyway. They also form pipelines into big tech, which I will get to a little bit later. All right, social media suppression. Has anyone been suppressed on social media? No. Okay. Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so there are really distinct ways that all these social media platforms have suppressed pro-Palestinian content, but they share quite a number of similarities. There's a couple of articles about this, really in-depth reports. One is from Hamlet. There's actually a new one from Hamlet. I didn't have it in time to put it into this, but this was one of their older articles from October 2023, and from 2023 also Human Rights Watch put out a significant article about the suppression of pro-Palestinian voices on social media. So the main tactics that are used for this social media suppression: complaints to ADL, censorship from leadership, mass reporting by bots and humans, biased policies, biased AI models, financial pressure, preferential treatment of Israel, and the suppression of internal pro-Palestinian advocates, that is within the particular tech companies. So one place to start with this is to understand the IHRA definition. I'm going to breeze through this, but the IHRA definition is a definition that Zionists are attempting to make the de facto definition of anti-Semitism. And some of its points are relatively good, such as at the top here, calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harm of Jews in the name of radical ideology or extremist view of religion. I think we could all agree that's anti-Semitism and that's bad. Once you get down a little bit, accusing Jews as a people or of Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. Obviously, exaggerating the Holocaust or accusations about exaggerating the Holocaust, that's anti-Semitic. But it's weird, this Israel as a state here, it just sort of got thrown in there. That was kind of odd. Then going a little bit down, denying the Jewish people the right of self-determination, e.g., just for example, by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Oh, we just crossed into something new here. This is, I don't know what this is, but this is not, it seems like criticism of the state of Israel is not really the same thing. And then drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. I don't know about you, but I think if you don't want to be compared to the Nazis, maybe don't do Nazi shit.
Yeah.
Anyhow, lots of people are against the IHRA definition, and the Foundation for Middle East Peace has put together 326 critiques of it, mostly by academics. And I pulled one here randomly. Yeah, people don't like it, and it undermines the fight against anti-Semitism, and importantly, a favorite tool of anti-democratic forces while failing to stem anti-Semitism. So this is bad, but it is heavily used, and in particular, one of the organizations that is trying really, really hard to get this spread, and actually doing a really good job of getting this spread is the ADL. They have weaponized that definition in schools, in states. AIPAC obviously involved. The whole Israel Lobby is working on this. But the ADL works with almost every tech company. They have a Silicon Valley command center that they established in 2017. I think it has 150 employees. And Jonathan Greenblatt, their CEO, will talk about this in interviews where he says, we're working with everyone. And he says, he's repeated this a couple of times. I think he really likes it. We're working with Amazon to Zillow, or everyone from Amazon to Zillow. One of the things I heard from people who work in these content groups, the people who are responsible for resolving these complaints, is that the ADL knows the rules better than we do. That is, that when the complaints come in, they have such a thorough understanding of exactly how the rules are written and how they can be applied, that often the people whose job it is to actually apply them don't have such a good understanding. The ADL is widely regarded to be racist, anti-black, anti-Arab, and it recently got banned from Wikipedia for being unreliable, but it is also behind a lot of these advertiser bans. One of the major things that the ADL does is it works with a coalition of advertisers to come down hard on people who they deem to be anti-Semitic or other things, such as, for example, Elon Musk. Now, this is a story in 6 parts, so I'm just going to read the headlines. Elon Musk agrees with tweet accusing Jewish people of hatred against whites. Elon Musk ponders Twitter poll on banning ADL from free speech site. Musk threatens to sue ADL after blaming it for X ad sales slump. ADL says it will resume advertising on X following feud with Elon Musk. Elon Musk's advertiser apologies tour begins at Cannes. Elon Musk attends Netanyahu's congressional address as his guest. So we don't have a lot of information about how specifically suppression happens on X, but I think we get the general idea. There's also a bunch of government influence networks that use tech to get in front of different parts of the government. This actually should go in a different part of the talk, but we're here, so here we are. Here's one talk. This is The Guardian. Israel documents show expansive government efforts to shape U.S. discourse around the Gaza war. And this one, Israeli influence operations targets U.S. lawmakers on Hamas UNRWA. So they are, putting ads out, and they're putting, lots of different influence things to get what they want and to spread their words. Some of the stuff that they're putting out are bots and human farms. And these are a collection that I found. Some of these are dead. Act.il is dead. But they're usually found in, there's an article somewhere in Times of Israel or in JPost or something like that, which talks about, this great new tool that Israel is putting out that is helping get the Israeli perspective out there. It's helping the war effort. This one is from 2013 on the BBC. Israel, the government pays students to fight internet battles. Isn't that wonderful? And so there's a bunch of these. Some are people creating content, but most of them are flagging. And if we know anything about social media, or if you know anything about social media, the most important thing is how quickly something rises in popularity. And the easiest way to kill something is to flag it. And so they have armies of humans and bots who are, taking some downtime on their phone to flag some content that is positive for Palestine. And they've been doing this. The third from the bottom there, Stand With Us, is huge. I read their 2021 prospectus about all the work they're doing. They're taking down hundreds of thousands of pieces. Really very, very popular. On Hacker News, Hacker News has its own flagging mechanism. Hacker News is this sort of like watering hole for the tech industry, and especially the engineer side of the tech industry. And here's a couple of pieces of mine that got flagged because they were about Palestine. It is a site that is, in my opinion, incredibly badly moderated. It's been moderated for about 12 years by this guy, Dan G. And when people called him out on the moderation of these particular pieces, what he said is, the topic isn't banned, the keyword isn't filtered, what you're seeing is users flagging the articles. So they, despite being one of the most important ways that people get their news of the tech industry, they can't resist the effect of a couple of stories being flagged. Now, let's talk a little bit about how leadership affects this. So the people on this are leaders at LinkedIn and Meta, this guy here on the left, this is Tomer Cohen. He's the CPO, the Chief Product Officer of LinkedIn. LinkedIn, one of the biggest social media platforms out there, definitely behind Meta, but before probably anything else, owned by Microsoft, of course. And Tomer Cohen has been running around very specifically and personally shutting down content. So my post when it came out went viral on LinkedIn, and I'm told that the reason that happened is because he was on vacation, and the post didn't actually get to him for a couple of days. And when he came back 3 days later, he immediately, and someone sent me the Slack message of him, personally censoring my posts. What we also see is people at Microsoft have claimed that they were attacked by other employees who said that they were going to sic Tomer on them. And I believe that he really gets quite involved in this. In one case, there was a delegation from LinkedIn that wanted to talk to the Palestinians and allies at Microsoft and to put together there was a presentation about the Nakba and sort of a general commiserating. And he personally went, Tomer Cohen personally went to the CEO of Microsoft, Fortune 50 company Microsoft, Fortune 5 company Microsoft, to get them to shut this down, which he did. Now on the Meta side, Guy Rosen is one of the names that is most frequently associated with the anti-Palestinian policies. He is ex-IDF. Oh, Tomer Cohen also ex-IDF. Both an Israeli. Guy Rosen lives in Tel Aviv. He was in Unit 8200, which we're not really going to get into in this talk, but is one of the places that really sources people in tech, or where they come from. He's heavily involved in the anti-Zionism policy that Meta came out with recently that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Sheryl Sandberg was the COO of Meta between I think about 2009 and 2022, and so she built the entire company. Right, Zuckerberg did the product, and Sheryl Sandberg did everything else. So the vast majority of people who got hired into senior positions in Meta were hired by Sheryl Sandberg or by her organization. Now that doesn't mean that Zuckerberg's off the hook, right? CEO, he's in charge of everything. But also he gave $125K to Zaka, which you might remember from earlier, is the organization that produced all this propaganda. So Jordana Cutler is another interesting one. So Jordana Cutler was the person who personally, according to Meta advocates, personally shut down the Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine Instagram account based on a new policy that says upside down red triangles are dangerous organizations or individuals. The J Post, the Jerusalem Post, has referred to her as our woman at Facebook. And in fact, her previous experience before joining Facebook was that she was a strategy advisor of the Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party, and that she worked at the Embassy for Israel in DC. So this is the head of, she's the head of policy for Israel and the Jewish diaspora. That encompasses Palestine because of how Meta is organized, and she is a zealot. Here's some things that have been said about her. We believe that Jordana Cutler's appointment as Director General of Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs. Oh, by the way, did I mention she's also Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs? That was announced at the end of last year. But even when she came in the first time, when she was appointed in 2016, it came in as an anti-BDS pressure thing. The Israeli government had felt that they weren't doing enough on anti-BDS, and so they put some pressure on Meta, and they got Jordana Cutler put into this role back then. Despite the censorship fears, sorry, this is 2016, these are 2023. All right, so talked about the IHRA, the definition of how that's used, and one of the most important things is this anti-Zionism policy. So that is a policy, I believe it's called Zionism as proxy, and the concept is that people often say Zionist in a way to insult Jewish people. And Meta took on this policy. It has been really pushed at the top from them. It seems that it has been coming from Guy Rosen and Sheryl Sandberg and Jordana Cutler and the people that we've talked about here. But an interesting thing about this policy is that TikTok is also adopting this exact same policy. And they adopted it a couple of months ago, and the reason that I would guess that they adopted it is because they're currently negotiating to not have to sell off their assets with the US government. And so that is being used as a cudgel to force them to take on these sort of weaponized policies. And the anti-Zionism policy, the Zionism as proxy, it's not a bad idea. People do actually, talk about Zionism as a proxy for Jewish people in some cases. But it's also something that can be massively weaponized and has been massively weaponized to shut down Palestinian conversation. And when you look at all the other things, how they go together, that there's the ADL that is trying to take posts down, that there's all these bot farms and humans who are reporting posts, and that now you've got a policy which is probably a little bit hard to read. It's going to get the flags are going to happen first, and then things might get through an appeal. But there's no point having your posts come back on appeal. No one is going to read them. The other policy that Meta in particular put out is the de-amplifying political speech. So there was a toggle that was added, I think it was in February this year, where political speech no longer appears if you don't specifically follow that person. And this is a sort of pattern that we see across the industry, where the political speech was allowed in October, November, December, as when Israel was sort of in the lead. And that as soon as Israel started falling out in the lead, they needed to shut down political speech, because political speech were starting to talk about Israeli atrocities, and that is exactly when this arrived in Meta. I'm sure that they've been working on that for many years or whatever, but the timing, they didn't have it in October 7th, but once the conversation started turning to the genocide of Palestinians, they activated it. Finally, not finally, we're getting close though. There's something that routinely happens is this preferential treatment for Israel. So one of the reasons that Israel has preferential treatment is because they have a lot of employees. These tech companies have a lot of employees in Israel. Google has 2,000 people, Meta has 800 people. The customer service is prioritized in Israel. So that's an interesting one. I believe that this was a policy of Guy Rosen, where Israel was put on a tier 1 customer service. And it sounds fairly innocuous, but what that means actually is that if your content gets shut down, it is important for it to be brought back. You're put to the front of the queue. Your appeals and all that sort of thing are considered first, but also often specific accounts are given exemptions. So the things that Netanyahu says on Instagram, for example, should not be allowed according to policies, but some specific Israeli accounts are given precedence, which is not afforded to Hamas, obviously. And in fact, Meta has a dangerous organizations and individual policy, which is specifically to shut down not just speech from an organization like Hamas, but also speech that really says any positive thing about it at all. And that is what happened to the Columbia SJP account. They deemed that having an upside down red triangle was glorification of a dangerous organization or individual. On LinkedIn, the phrase "from the river to the sea, Israel is all you'll see" is explicitly allowed, as is its twin "from the river to the sea, Israel will forever be," but "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," disallowed. Another thing, if you're interested in reading more about the AI model for Hebrew, the Hamlet report came out today that talks about that. But if there's no AI model for Hebrew, then they can't do automated takedowns of hate speech. And this is one of the ways that Israel has become massively radicalized, because their social media has no AI models. Certainly in X and in Instagram, it exists, but it's a lot weaker, I believe, than other ones. Now, you might ask, why are these companies able to have these policies? Why can this social media suppression happen? And the reason for it is because a lot of people within these companies want this. And it's not just the leadership. In almost every company, and also in a lot of smaller startups that aren't quite in big tech but may themselves have thousands of employees, the HR complaints that were weaponizing anti-Semitism was the #1 way of suppressing internal discussion of Palestine. One of the ways that in particular that this happened was banning certain words or topics. And the time that certain words and topics got banned was really interesting. At Meta, for example, you couldn't say anything about Palestine in the early days of October, November, but you could say whatever you liked about Israel. And as the tide turned, in December, January, February, I don't remember the exact time frame, Meta decided that no political speech is allowed. So they, instead of making it fair in some way, or allowing people to talk about a genocide, an atrocity being committed by a state that Meta is helping with, they instead said no political speech. And anyone who posts about the genocide, anyone who posts even articles like Human Rights Watch articles about the genocide, or that are talking about specifically what Meta is doing, those are all taken down by, at Meta it's called CE, but at most companies, they have this sort of similar community engagement function, which can take down comments, and it takes them down when the reports are made. And reports typically come from Jewish ERGs. You can see there's a lot of discussion online about how that happened at Google, and the split between the original Jewish ERG, which was called Jubilers, and the latest, or the split off version, which is explicitly anti-Zionist, is called Jewish Diaspora at Google.
Jewish Diaspora Solidarity.
Thank you. Jewish Diaspora Solidarity. But the other thing, and this one is really huge, the Israeli subsidiaries. I'm going to talk about that actually in a second. I just want to talk about banning words a little bit more. At Google, the word genocide got banned from being used internally in April, May, sometime around that. Crazy. You just can't say the word genocide anymore. There's a genocide going on, but you don't want to talk about it at Google. So the Israeli subsidiaries is a really, where are we going here? There we go. The Israeli subsidiaries is a really important thing, because that is the way that they get a lot of pro-Israeli people within the company. They, big tech companies very frequently acquire Israeli companies. We heard in the case of LinkedIn that when Tomer Cohen came on at LinkedIn, the very first thing he did was he acquired an Israeli company. And the reason that you do that is because now you have a lot of people in your corner. Now you have a lot of practically de facto Zionists who are here to make these HR reports, to build these policies. In some cases, we've seen that they make complaints to take down things that are used for Palestinian organizing. In one company, the Israeli subsidiary, employees of the Israeli subsidiary, just went and used internal systems that they had access to take down content, just with bypassing the actual avenues of that content suppression. They also provide Israeli tax dollars to Israel. 36% of income taxes in Israel comes from tech. 20% of the overall, 20-ish% of the overall tax take of Israel comes directly from income tax of employees within Israel, tech employees within Israel. And another beautiful one, this is certainly at Meta, at Google, the US parent company is paying the full salaries of the soldiers who are in Gaza They do not have to pay the full salaries, they do not have to pay benefits, they're not required by law to do that, but that's what they're doing. They're paying full salaries while the soldiers are actually going in and committing the atrocities.
Do you mean like the soldiers are technically employed, but they're like busy doing genocide?
So the soldiers are reservists,
Oh.
and the company is required to allow them to take time off to be in the army, as is required by law. And the company is required to pay the stipend via their payroll systems, but they're not required to pay the full salary while they are on duty.
Wow.
And some companies choose to do it anyway. So there's a really interesting thing, and I'm just gonna, I think this will sort of connect the whole talk together. We have this incredibly Zionist venture capital community. That venture capital community is investing in Israeli startups. The Israeli startups get acquired by big tech. And the army, and I haven't talked about Unit 8200, I'm not going to talk about it here, but just let's say, the IDF, the people from the IDF, they go into venture capital, they go into Israeli startups, they go into big tech directly, and then via Israeli startups. And that is how big tech provides a lot of money for the Israeli tax authority, helps with the content suppression and the Zionist policy, which shuts down Palestinian speech, and all of that contributes directly to the genocide. Thank you.